Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Our show today is going to be very Akron-centric.
Yeah, big time.
We have a guy, I don't know, we had David Giffords on a while ago, and we called him Mr. Akron.
Well, Jim Carney.
And Jim Carney, he's another Mr. Akron. Where's that third one? Our guest is Jason Segedy. Hi, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for being here, man.
And Jason has been intimately involved in a lot of the planning and development that has been going on in Akron over the last, I'd say, 15 years, 20 years you've been doing this?
25.
Oh,
25.
Yeah.
Wow.
Getting old.
You're a young-looking fella. I would not have guessed that.
Thank you.
But and he's a self-confessed Rust Belt orphan. And I'm alluding to a essay that he wrote for a collection that came out about 8 years ago called the Akron Anthology. And Nick had the book, and he was talking about what a great essay that was, passed it on to me. But Nick, go ahead.
It was a great essay. I mean, it's been a while since I cried after reading, a short story of any type, And, my family, my dad worked at Goodyear for 25 years in the cafeteria, but my band of Bizarros, every one of our members, the family, were rubber workers. Our drummer, even his mother, worked at one of the rubber shops. But it was a great book. But I enjoyed your story so much.
Oh, I really appreciate it. It was a labor of love to write that.
Yeah. And Jason edited the entire anthology. We should point out. I'm a little different in that I didn't move here until late in high school, so I'm not originally from Akron. But it still rang a lot of bells. My father worked for Goodyear, and so this was always like our mecca. This was his goal, was to get. He kept getting promotions, and we would move all over the Midwest. And ultimately, his goal was to end up in Akron. And my family came to Akron on vacation at one time.
Amazing.
Mine went to Barberton.
That's something my dad would say.
But anyway, it should be pointed out that it's really an essay that you wrote and not a story so much. It just rang a lot. It brought a lot of memories back, and I just think your whole take on the history of Akron and where we are now and where we're headed, it was really great. And so instead of me gabbing about it, I want to talk to you about it. So you can use the essay as a starting point, but I mean, that's 8 years ago. I'm sure you have some new thoughts about it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that prompted me to write it was I had started to get into blogging, and it really was one of those pieces of writing that I'm not exactly sure where it came from. No one had commissioned me to go out and write this essay about Akron or anything. And I just sitting at my computer one day thinking about what to write about. I think maybe, when I wrote that, I was 41. So I had just gotten into like official middle age. And then maybe that is the time for, reflection.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about how much the city has really changed. And I know David Giffords has said this before, and I'm probably even... I would have been even younger than he was at the time, but it's like my earliest memories are like the very end of the rubber industry. Like I'd say when I was, 5, and I talk about this in the essay a little bit, you could still drive down the expressway, especially like in East Akron, or over by Firestone or Goodrich, and still smell rubber, but it was not long after that, then those jobs were all gone.
Yeah.
And like you, I have some family history in the rubber industry. My great-grandfather, who was an immigrant from Hungary, he had moved originally to Pennsylvania when he came to the United States, worked in the coal mines, and then made his way to Akron to work at Firestone. My grandpa worked at Firestone. My uncle, who I talk about, who tragically died on the job at BF Goodrich. he was a tire builder at Mohawk before that. So it just kind of got me thinking about how we got put on the map by that industry, but that enough time, I think, has passed. It's not that the industry is gone. I mean, as you guys know,
right.
We have a lot of R&D. We still have the corporate presence of Goodyear, but
it's evolved.
Yes, it's definitely evolved. And I think that one of the big open questions, and I would say this still is true to me even 8 years after the essay, is, where are we going? Like, what is the next thing for Akron? And I don't know that that's a question with a cut and dried answer, but I think we are still kind of in that process of like forging our path into the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked before on the show about how that is one thing that I think we both have found to be kind of remarkable about Akron is that compared to so many other cities that could fit into that general Rust Belt description, Akron still is, still thriving. I mean, it still seems like a really nice place to live, and there's a lot of other towns that would be demographically in the similar boat as us. They're not so great anymore. Their downtowns have completely fallen apart.
I just picked up used Springsteen's Ghost of Tom Joad, and it's got that song Youngstown in it, and it could have been Akron, but we persevered, we got over it.
Here in Northeast Ohio, back in 1803.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting dynamic about this city. I think, like I've said this in other pieces of writing, that we are kind of like the quintessential middle city in many ways, where we're big enough to kind of be somewhat on the national radar, but there's a lot of people who maybe don't know much about Akron, but we're small enough that we have like a close-knit community, or we were talking earlier about how everybody knows each other. And I think that's kind of true with like the way the city declined as well, to your point, that we didn't suffer to the degree that like a Flint or a Gary or a Youngstown did. But we're not firing maybe on all cylinders economically, and things are still challenging here. And we're, big enough to kind of have weathered the storm more than some of those smaller places, but we're not Columbus either. And so I think it kind of just does lead into all those questions of like identity and our future.
When I worked for the Akron Summit County Public Library, I worked at the main library, and I was in charge of the main event speaker series. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was always surprised by, well-known and, educated, interesting, very intelligent people that we would bring, writers and people that were working in the arts and stuff. And just how short memories can be. I mean, it was really surprising. People would say, like, well, so tell me about Akron. And I would almost always begin with, well, Akron was the home of the rubber industry and stuff. And there would be like a blank look on their faces sometimes. And then I'd say, like, well, you've heard of the Goodyear blimp, right? Oh, yeah, the blimp. Okay, they know that. And I'm like, well, there was a reason why there was a blimp, It was because there was a Goodyear tire and rubber company here. And it was just really surprising to me how many people didn't even seem to really realize about that historical background of the city. So then, you go to the safe fallbacks like LeBron James,
Devo, Pretenders.
Devo, and then if you really have to reach Jeffrey Dahmer, oh yeah, again.
They get it every time.
That one they know.
I was a weird story that has to do with that. I was doing landscaping and construction when I was in college, and we were working at a house in Bath when that story broke, and when they had sadly discovered some of those remains at that house. And so every day when we went to work, we were going through this gauntlet of CNN and all these other national news outlets. Really? And it was another one of those kind of strange Akron things, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just get this out of the way because it's funny, because we were talking about Akron being a small town. So in a way, but not, and people knowing one another or whatever. So Jeffrey Dahmer, two of my best friends went to school with him. One of them is Durf Backdurf, who wrote My Friend Dahmer, the graphic comic on him. I've been in a band with Chris Butler. Chris Butler lives in the house
he owns
that
the house,
Dahmers lived in.
No kidding.
We rehearsed there.
We've been there a few times.
It's just so weird, you know, like all these little odd connections and stuff by chance. But anyway,
back to
Jason.
Yeah.
So, Jason, I know from reading your essay that you were born in Akron at St. Thomas Hospital, as a matter of fact, right?
Yeah. I was born at St. Thomas Hospital and grew up here. I've lived here my whole life, other than a 2-year stint in graduate school when I lived in North Carolina, and that was a really good experience. I mean, I think it was in retrospect, it was important for me to get away a little bit, just to have some perspective on like what another place is like.
Right.
But it was and when I left for grad school, I didn't go into it like, oh, I can't wait to get out of Akron. I wasn't one of those people, but I kind of went into it more like, I don't know where I'll end up after I get, I'm mostly just trying to get this degree so I can put food on the table.
What was your degree in?
In geography and urban planning.
Okay. Oh.
And so I loved geography. I from the time I was 5 years old, I was obsessed with maps. I loved maps. I would tell my mom how to get around town, even at that age. And my dad would give me like the Sohio maps or whatever when we went to the gas station. I was the oldest of 4 boys. I was always the one with the triptych. We went on a road trip somewhere. But,
excellent.
But so being in North Carolina, I mean, Charlotte is a very prosperous and growing city. And so a very white collar city. A lot of people from Ohio there, and especially a lot of people from New York and New Jersey, because they went there with the financial industry. Charlotte's a big banking center.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to just see kind of that contrast between like a Rust Belt city and this place. Like, I remember thinking when I first got to Charlotte, like, oh, it seems nice here. But and this is probably the Northeast Ohio in me. But like as time went on, people were so like almost like it seemed to me like it was phony. It might have been genuine, but like almost like phonily optimistic about the place. Like Charlotte's the best place and it was a really great place, but it almost like rubbed me the wrong way, because I was so used to being from somewhere where people are like, well, why did you move here? Or like what possibly would ever. And it kind of made me realize how much I really love Ohio and love Akron. And so by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I was pretty firm in my conviction of wanting to come back here. And I would say like it helped me love this place more by being away. I did appreciate it,
the
definitely.
Contrast to that. That's interesting. Now, when you got that degree, then did come back to Akron?
I did. I moved back to Akron, and the first job I got right out of school.
Which is, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
okay.
Yep. It was actually in Canton. So I had, I've almost always since then had like an 8 to 10 minute commute. And so, the 30-minute commute to Canton, which is still by national standards, not really that bad, but, it seemed, like a tortuous effort for me. But I did that for a year. I worked for a planning agency in Canton, and then I got a job with our metropolitan planning organization here in Akron called AMATS. And
does that still exist?
It does, yeah. It's a transportation planning agency that does federal funding and covers communities throughout Summit and Portage County. So administered through the City of Akron. So I was a city employee all told for almost 25 years between that and my next gig, which was being the planning director for the city.
Okay, yeah. Now that was with Mayor Horrigan's administration?
Yeah, I came in. He had asked me to join his team right after he got elected in November of 2015. And so I started that role in January of 2016 when he took office.
This just comes to mind, but one thing that I think you kind of can't overlook about Akron was the Don Plisquelic years, this was a guy who was mayor for a long time and kind of made the city in his own image, didn't he?
Yeah, long time. I mean, I remember thinking when, it was right when he stepped down in 2015, thinking like, wow, he's been mayor since I was a sophomore in high school, and I was already in my 40s then. So it was a long time. I think he did play like a very unique and important role in the city's history of being that kind of like transition from, he took the helm, the heyday for sure of like the blue collar part of the rubber industry had been gone for several years at that point.
Right.
But there was, rubber still loomed pretty large in the city's economy, but the white collar part was quickly in the process of kind of fragmenting and, all the different, there was the whole Goldsmith incident with Goodyear right before Plisquelic took office. So he really did, I think, take the helm at like a really critical time to get us through that period from kind of like the last days of the rubber industry and kind of that previous incarnation kind of into where we are now. And I do think he set the stage with like a lot of the downtown redevelopment, whether that was getting like Canal Park. I mean, you guys remember better than me even just it's almost hard for me to even picture like the Anthony Wayne Hotel or some of those buildings that were where the stadium is. And it's still, well, I guess it is a long time ago now, but it's still amazing how different that area really looks with that stadium and with some of the other redevelopment that's happened there. I still remember the days of going to like Mr. Bilbo's and playing euchre there with people or something, and there's like 5 other people downtown. It seems like at night. So
I remember
changed.
Being a parking lot attendant during college at one of the Russell Harp lots, where I got robbed twice.
Oh boy,
at gunpoint. But and then at nighttime, that you mentioned the Anthony Wayne, that next to it was the club that turned into the bank, where all of our bands played, know. But you'd leave there at night, and it was like a ghost town, And now on a weekend you have the baseball game and something at the Civic Theater at Lock 3. I mean, it's like it looks it's a good.
Oh, it's a very different feeling
vibe.
at every vibe, very different for sure. And anyone that ever had encounters with Mayor Don has a story, but
he got us through a lot of stuff.
But he did, and it was kind of like, I think that it was when he finally decided to, step down and leave. It was kind of,
what do we do? Our father's gone.
It was a little bit like that, sort of like when Mao left or something in China. I know, just a guy who had been so in charge.
The Leonard
for
Cohen
so long.
line about your father and a doctor died.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are definitely right that I remember, and I didn't have when Mayor Plisquelic stepped down, and in the run up to that election in 2015, I had never met Mayor Horrigan. I didn't have any inkling when I was reading, the Beacon Journal and say October or September of that year that I would be working for the mayor. Yeah. So I remember when I was still kind of like a civilian, so to speak, thinking about just like how long he had been in office. And to your point, like all the discussion that was going on in the newspaper and I think in the community about like, well, what's next for us? It was like there were plenty of people in this town that couldn't remember another mayor.
Right.
And so that I think when Mayor Horrigan took office, that was an important, I think, civic milestone in a way, too, because it was the first post-Plisquelic administration. And but I guess kind of keeping with the theme of what we're talking about, I think like Akron it's held its own, post-rubber. And definitely has fared better than a lot of Rust Belt cities.
Sure.
But I do think that we're, maybe we can get into this as we talk about some of the other issues you want to discuss. But like, where does the city kind of sit in relation to the whole national economy? Or there's a lot of talk now about like reshoring industry or things like that. And I always kind of go back and forth in my own mind, like, what will that mean for us? Like, is it? I think making things is still very much in our DNA, but the country is so, the Sun Belt has grown so much. I wonder, will all the factories just go to the south like they did when they left here? I'm hoping that we can attract industry back, because I think it's still a really important thing. I think we need jobs for kind of ordinary, everyday people.
Right.
I don't, even though I work at a university and have a master's degree in value education very much, I don't think an economy that everyone feels like they have to go to college is what we need. I think we need
totally
opportunity for people without degrees.
Well, we have the endless supply of water, the Great Lakes, so we've got that as a important factor to get jobs here.
Absolutely.
It does seem like what is increasingly playing a major role in a lot of like planning discussions is demographics, just an actual amount of people, right? I mean, we are like the upcoming generation is much smaller in number than what has been there before, right? It's almost like having enough workers is an issue.
Yeah, I think especially in this part of the country, because I had done some writing for like an economic think tank a couple years ago, and I'm going to probably butcher the exact statistics, but it was like since 1970, I think the U.S., this is probably a ballpark figure if I get it slightly wrong, has grown by about a third, and Northeast Ohio has shrunk by 7%.
Right.
So it's like, I think that's a really important dynamic to your point about demographics, is like in some ways we're kind of, and I think there's actually good and bad that comes with this, but we're very insulated in this part of the country from a lot of national trends, like some of the hot button debates about immigration and so forth. Like the share of immigrants here is very, very low compared to the rest of the country, even though we do have pockets of immigrants, say in North Hill and things like that, or some of the, a lot of cities, the constant refrain, especially around 2020 and still now, is like the incredible cost of housing and how you can't afford to live there. And it's another one of those trends. It's like my brother lives in New Jersey and had lived in New York City for 20 years. And it's like the cost of those, I mean, his house is pretty much like ours in a similar neighborhood, and it's like 4 or 5 times as expensive.
My son did the same thing. Moved from New York to New Jersey, and his house is like exactly the same. 4 or 5 times the cost of one year.
Yeah, so I do think that's a great opportunity. I mean, I know like sometimes people who are very negative or cynical will say, well, it's so cheap because no one wants to live there. But I actually don't think that's a very fair I don't think that's really a fair characterization. I think it's really out of whack in some of these other cities.
Right.
And I do think over time, as the country kind of evolves, I mean, even like climate, I think is another issue that, I don't know, this has been a pretty mild February, and it's like with whatever degree of climate change is happening, I mean, it might be one of those things. I've seen a lot of studies where our part of the country could even be positioned to somewhat benefit from that. So I think
all that.
There's a lot of things for the future, I think, here that are very positive and very bright.
It's funny. I can't tell you how many sort of guilty conversations I have with friends about, it's a beautiful day. It's kind of weird. It's 65 and it's February, but well, it's beautiful though. It's like if you've been around as long as me and Nick, it's like February this time of year usually meant there was 15 inches of snow on the ground and it was freezing. And so, but on the other hand, you're right. I mean, it's sort of,
2 years in a row.
I mean, it seems to still be a moderate kind of thing here, right? It's not like we're getting 130-degree temperatures or something.
Right. Yeah. And the water that you mentioned earlier, I mean, so many places don't have access to that. I mean, kind of the urban planner in me, I mean, I've read and watched some really interesting documentaries on like how water came to the Southwest and, Mulholland and Los Angeles and the aqueducts. And I mean, for Vegas or Phoenix or Southern California, I mean, it's going to be a crazy next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
because it's totally artificial.
Yeah. I mean, the Colorado River doesn't even flow into the Pacific Ocean anymore. It's dry before it gets there. So it really, I think that's another one of those things that it's. I know it turns into a cliche. Oh, we have a lot of water, and I think there'll be a certain kind of person who's like, "Well, who cares?" But it's really important. I mean, if you've lived somewhere that doesn't have a lot of water,
right.
You know how important it is.
Didn't we try to a lot of the Great Lakes governments got together and we were sort of protecting that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've always said like I'm a pretty nonviolent guy, but that might actually be one thing that would make me take up arms would be defending that water, because I think it is really important, and I would be vehemently opposed to any effort to ever pipe it away.
Right.
You know, because I feel like, look, that's something that this is something that benefits the people here, and if you want the water, we're happy to have you, but you're going to have to come to it.
Yeah, come to us.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. So our guest is Jason Segedy, and we are talking about Akron, past, present, and future. I'm Bob Ethington, here with my co-host, Nick Nicholas. This is From Akron and Beyond. And Jason was talking about working for the City of Akron as part of their planning wing and department. But you now work for the University of Akron, am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. And my understanding is that you're very involved with the work on the Polsky Building that's going on. So tell us some about that.
Yeah. Sure, that's right. And as a kind of a lead into that, I was really thrilled to be able to come to the university, because I'm a proud alum of the University of Akron. Both of my parents graduated from the University of Akron, as well as two of my brothers. So we have a lot of family history with that great university, and I was really thrilled to come work for President Miller too, because I mean, as we all know, the university went through a real hard time for a couple of years there, and I was really, when the opportunity presented itself, I was very confident in his leadership, and so I'm really glad to be there. And after I loved my time at the city. But, you're thinking constantly about 62 square miles, of planning things. And obviously there's many people thinking about it, not just me. But it was kind of fulfilling, like from a career standpoint, to change the scale from like the entire city to this block between State Street, University Avenue, Main Street, and High Street. Yeah. But at the same time, the building itself is both like historical. It's a very interesting building. And it's huge. It's 427,000 square feet, which I always put that in Walmarts. It's 3 Walmarts.
Wow.
So it is a very large building. It's actually much larger square footage than, say, like I always call it the First National Tower, because that's what I know it as.
Sure. Yeah, me too.
Then the Huntington / First National Tower. So what I like about the role is I was able to kind of focus more on one thing rather than all sorts of things, but it's one fairly complicated and involved thing. So it's been cool to work on it. Yes. And fortunately, just like at the city, I've got a great set of coworkers to help me, so I don't have to be the Lone Ranger by any means on the Polsky project. But I'm excited about it.
So give us an idea of what you're envisioning for that.
Sure. So the overall vision when I was hired, and I would say this remains constant, was the university had gotten a $20 million grant from the Knight Foundation for the reinvention and the reimagination of the Polsky Building. And I imagine most listeners probably know a little bit about it, but just like the Cliff's Notes version, it was built in 1930. It was one of our 2 preeminent department stores, along with O'Neill's, which personally we were always an O'Neill's family. My mom had like every Christmas she would get out all the photos of us with Santa, and each one it seemed like I would look a little less enthusiastic as I got older.
When you were 17.
I think I tapped out at maybe like 13 or something like that. But that's a good point. But so and it was a department store till 1978, so almost 50 years. And then the university had acquired it in 87, and we officially renovated it and reopened it for classes and offices in 1993. So it's served us well for 30 years in that role. But I think one thing that prompted the award of the grant was, the building's getting a little tired, a little bit in need of a refresh,
Right.
And I think also with the drop in enrollment, which is thankfully stabilized now, the university had a lot of excess space all over the place, and so I think as part of the president's effort to kind of right size things, this building loomed pretty large in his mind, and so what the general vision is to reinvent it more, and maybe something that's relevant to this podcast, like is more of a center of arts and culture. So our plan is to get some very great arts focused uses into it, but also to keep it as still an academic building with some offices and classrooms.
Right.
And this is one of the things I'm really excited about and looking forward to how we navigate it and pull it off, but trying to get some retail, like specifically some food. There's a Starbucks in the building right now, but maybe a couple more food offerings that can both serve downtown as well as serve the people in the building as an amenity. And then one of the things that I think everybody's excited about, and you guys probably know from being down there, is for decades those doors on Main Street have been locked, and they will absolutely be reopened. And we'll probably change the entry, kind of rework where the main entrance on both Main and High Street are. We're kind of at the beginning of the design process with architects, and if I talk to you again 3 or 4 months from now, or anybody else in the community, I think I'd be able to give you probably a pretty detailed plan for what's going to go in the building, but we're kind of getting into that stage right now.
Right. Well, how long do you see this redesign and renovation taking?
So the architectural design and then the construction plans, that's slated to take us through about April or so of next year, so a little bit more than a year from now, and then at that point it could actually go under construction. And we have penciled in it's a pretty long construction timeline, probably 2.5 years to renovate that building, but it's possible that it could be broken into phases, and so we could maybe do one part, and one of our goals, not to get into the weeds too much, it would be to only have to move people once.
Right.
So our plan is to keep the building occupied and used, but kind of have swing space where functions that are in there can move to a different area and then come back into their final home in the building. But so come 2027, we're hoping to get it open.
Well, that's not that bad of a timeline, though. I mean, that's a big project.
Yeah.
Jason, I don't know. Does the university still own the old ballet center there?
We did own that until a couple years ago, and then I believe that Tony Tropy had acquired it from us. The building that had burned.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that Tony owns that now.
So it's going to be preserved then?
Yeah, I know he has plans to try to renovate it. And, that building, people really have a soft spot for. Beautiful historic church, and I think just that prominent corner it sits on.
Right.
And I hope he's worked his magic on a lot of other projects. So I'm sure that when he gets to it, that he'll be able to do something cool there.
Yeah,
that's good news.
Well, you mentioned moving people around, and that is a major logistical, can be a nightmare. I mean, I worked again at the main library, and so I was there in that period where the new building was built, and the old one was torn down, and we were at a temporary site on Talmadge Avenue. And
I forgot all about that. I remember going there to get books.
Right.
The old Gold Circle, or where the
county
is now. Where the county is now.
Yes.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that's where the library was for about 3 years. It took longer.
And I bet it seemed even longer than that. It did. You worked there.
It was an interesting environment. But at the same time, this brings up to me something that I was always thinking about when I worked downtown, which was, and I'm just curious your thoughts about it. I know it's not a sensitive subject, but you get a lot of different answers to this, which is the involvement and sort of interface of the university with downtown Akron. It seems to me that seems like a natural kind of, when you think of a college town, you think of all the bars and the restaurants and cool other places that can open up around that environment of a student body being there. And it seems to me we've never really taken total advantage of that.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Like, I think that, I'm going to sound like an urban planner for a minute here, but
okay.
I am what I am. So, but I think like what's interesting about our downtown is there's a couple of factors I think that contribute to this. But so Akron was a canal town, and downtown was designed to be this like long, narrow downtown that went along the canal.
Right.
And then you have the rubber industry start up in 1870 and flourish like it did. And so unlike a lot of cities, like the job, it's not that there weren't jobs downtown. And there was a lot of retail, obviously, especially in the heyday of like the 20s and the 30s. But a lot of the big employment centers were actually not downtown. They were out at the plants, at General Tire,
Sure.
Goodyear, Firestone, or Goodrich. And so it's like Akron's kind of got a very small, physically small downtown for the size of the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And so I think between having like that long, and then it's constrained, right? Like a lot of this happened with urban renewal, but the inner belt came in and cut it off from one side. We've got the Little Cuyahoga Valley and the Y Bridge on one side, those pesky, important but pesky railroad tracks that separate the university and downtown. And so it's like really only to the south that it kind of, but that's where Goodrich was. So it's kind of this strange, it's almost like a lot of cities, if you're walking downtown, there's a point where you kind of just transition into residential neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And like we almost don't really have that. There's always some barrier. And so to your point about the university, there was that effort, I think it was actually called Span the Tracks back in the late 80s. And I think it had some success, but I think you are right that we've never quite fully cracked the code on like full integration between the university and downtown. And I think this project will help. We plan to work with Mayor Malik and his administration on some physical improvements to University Avenue, like on that bridge. Bridge is getting, you can see rebar when you're walking across parts of it. It's looking, it's safe, but it's looking, it needs to be refurbished.
Not the Mill Street one.
No, the Mill Street one's great. Yeah. And like my hope is we can make the University Avenue Bridge look more like the Mill Street. It's got those nice lights and because it really is not, I walk like I think actually that's where I ran into you, Bob, at the Lockview.
Right,
but
yes.
I'll walk to the Lockview or somewhere like, it's only a half a mile from my office. It's not far, but there's something psychological about crossing that bridge. And so I do think that there are some things with design we can do to, and then obviously if we have a really vibrant and busy Polsky building, that'll be good for Main Street. Right. And conversely, the new Lock 3, the new people living in apartments, I think that'll help our building as well. So
Right.
Yeah, we had Howard Parr here a few weeks ago. And
Howard's great.
Yeah, we were talking about Lock 3 and revamping of that. It's going to be really a great deal when it's finished,
Yeah, the arts and culture that having the Civic there, having the bands play at Lock 3, I think, and that really fits in well with the vision for the Polsky building to be a hub of arts and culture too. So I think we're going to have a nice little, I've been calling it the University and Main District, but a nice little district there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what's happening now is really exciting, and it's been interesting. It's been interesting times, right, in terms of the refurbishing of downtown. There was, when I was still working, it always seemed like, boy, everything is finally done with Main Street, and the next thing you know, they'd be digging it up again. I never could figure out exactly what was going on. It was something to do with the sewage or pipes or something. Yeah. But it was bad though, because being someone who worked at Maine, it was like I was always, one of my missions was always self-appointed missions, was always to try to get people to come downtown to use the main library. And we've talked about this before on the show that, Akron, and we've kind of talked about it on this episode, is that there is sort of a small town mentality in a way with some people. So it's kind of like, if you go to Cleveland, that you're paying to park. There's still a lot of people that just are resistant to the idea of having to pay to park, coming downtown.
A lot of stuff's free. They just don't know about it.
And they just don't realize it. And then, and even just like the one-way streets, well, people will be like completely confused by that. And it's like, well, there's only really a couple of them. I mean, it's not that, but it just surprises me how resistant people would be to it, to coming downtown, and I felt like a lot of that construction, it became, at that point, it became like a problem for me, because then if somebody said like, yeah, but you come down there and there's all this construction, I can't even tell which way I'm supposed to turn on the main or on the, there really wasn't much I could say, right?
Yeah.
Because they were kind of right. I was getting confused half the time. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, at some point when things are really, like when you've got the Polsky building up and running full speed and everything with the lock is going full speed, I think Akron needs to do some real marketing to open it up. Maybe make all the parking free for a week or something. I don't know. Something to get people downtown, just to see what great stuff is there.
Yeah, I think you really are hitting on a lot of important topics, and I agree with you. And I do think like one thing that downtown could really use, and this could fit in closely with what you were saying about the marketing, and this is, I think it's partly a function because it is very long and spread out, that we've always had, at least since, say, like the department stores closed in that era, like there's always been like a smattering of things. Like there's a little island of stuff near Brico when Brico was there. There's a little island of stuff where Tony Tropy has like Blue Jazz. But I actually, when I was planning director, I measured it one time, like on High Street, we had, this is the kind of stuff I would do, we had like 3,000 plus feet of High Street with 2 retail businesses. There, we had Grismer's, and then we had, at the time it was Nuevo, I think. So it was like, there wasn't any critical mass in some of those areas. And one thing, and I think the block the Polsky Building is on is one of the key areas. I'm not just saying that because of the project, but just because of some of the other things. I think one of the strategies we have to do downtown is get like 2 blocks of nothing but full buildings and activity. Because like if you look at Cuyahoga Falls, I mean, Cuyahoga Falls is so much smaller community that they've done, I mean, my hat is off to them. They have done a great job. When I was planning director and I would talk to Fred Guerra, who's the planning director at Cuyahoga Falls, we would go to lunch and I would say, Fred, I want your downtown to be the best one in Summit County except for downtown Akron. But he and the mayor there really did a nice job. And I think it kind of gets to what you were saying about the one-way streets, in the sense like they didn't have a one-way street, but they had a closed street. And I think they got the balance exactly right, where you cannot rip down that street at 50 miles an hour, but you can drive down it and see what's there, but it's very pedestrian friendly. And then they did create a lot of incentives for businesses, so you can walk a couple blocks and there's just always something. And I think that's something that Akron, we need to work together on, those of us who are working in downtown, to try to get like that critical mass for a couple blocks. Because I think when a city does that, then that's like your hub, and then you start to see the tentacles go out of development in other directions. And I'm confident we can get there. Yeah,
that's really a good point. I never quite thought of it that way, but you're right. There are these, for an area that's not really that big, there's still some strange gaps and stuff in the downtown area that could be better used.
Yeah. And I think this goes to what you were saying about maybe a little bit of like the small town sense of some people who maybe are a little resistant to seeing what's down there. But this is kind of a psychological fact that like people, especially if they're not familiar, like they feel uncomfortable walking, like say a block with nothing but parking lots, or a block of just there's not a lot of activity. So it's like the more activity you can get, you're kind of paving the way to make people feel more comfortable, and they see other people, and they see see life. And these are all things that are easier said than done, but they have been done in many cities, and they can be done here.
Right. So I think you're working here at an exciting time, right? I mean, there's a lot of potential here for exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, it is. It's. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be working on this project, and I like it too. I mean, kind of related to what we've been talking about the last few minutes. That my time at the city or the relationships I established, like I still know those people. You know, I can still work and collaborate with people, and so I'm excited.
And I think there has always been a collaborative spirit in Akron. Just like people from different areas of commerce or government or the various, the libraries or the museums and the university, what have you, being able to get together, and actually talk about stuff. That's always existed.
We've always pulled
There's
together
always
pretty
turf,
well.
But, some turf battles. But I think it's been, at least the lines of communication to tend to be open.
Right.
I forgot, we also have the Akron Historical Museum opening, right? Within the next few months.
Akron History Center. Yes. That's
on Main Street.
In the Bowery, right?
Right. That's coming at some point this summer, I think, is when they're aiming to open that. This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Nicholas. We've been interviewing Jason Segedy and talking about future of Akron. And I guess I have to ask a couple of quick questions here. First of all, a key one, which is, so once this Polsky project is done, do you see what your next step is going to be? Or are you just pretty much enveloped in that right now?
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty much enveloped in that right now. And
it's a big job.
Yeah.
So the last thing you need to be thinking about is what next?
The university is a great place, so I'm going to be, I think, happy to be there as long as they'll have me. But no, I'm pretty focused right now on just getting the project up and running.
There's a lot of excitement about it. I mean, a lot of people I've talked to are really excited about what's happening.
The building means a lot to people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So I need to ask, because this is just part and parcel of the fun that we have here on the show, which is we've talked touched upon Akron's music history. And so since you are actually a born and bred Akronite, I have to ask, what kind of music were you into when you were growing up? And do you remember going to see bands much, or was that something you weren't into? Or
Yeah, no, I love music, and I could do a whole podcast. You guys are a lot more knowledgeable, but I really have been obsessed with music. It's kind of like my other great love, other than some of the geographic stuff. And I would say, I'm a child of the '80s mostly. So, but I always. Well, she's either very generous to me because she's my wife and she's a great person, but I constantly making these playlists. So I made this, and this kind of gets to your question of what I'm into. I made this 1,600 plus song playlist from.
Sounds like Brad said it.
Yeah. Well, that's in an hour for you.
It's chronological from 1966 to 2015. So it's basically 50 years. The first song on it is Taxman by the Beatles. And the last song is Reality by Grimes. And that was when I just got too old and I wasn't really up on current music. But I would say that playlist, and it kind of reveals my interests, is classic rock, punk, new wave. I grew up loving heavy metal and hard rock. So the first concert I ever went to was Def Leppard at the Richfield Coliseum. Alternative, indie, electronic. So I'm pretty broad. You never got too into country or hip hop.
Right. Yeah.
I even like a lot of jazz and things like that, but more the older jazz, like Charlie Parker or that era. But I have a lot of music, and I always say that I'm like a professional appreciator, like John Cusack says in High Fidelity. It's like I did dabble with guitar and bass back in the day, but I was more of like a garage band guy.
Sure, yeah.
But
a lot of good stuff happens in the garage.
Yeah, right.
Stays in the garage too.
1, 2, 3,
4, 1, 2.
It's funny, you mentioned heavy metal, and this is just an aside that has nothing to do with anything, but I admire the hardcore fandom of heavy metal people. I wish I had that for any one band. I mean, we were at.
I know you're going to tell that story.
We were at Scott Shepard's Time Traveler record store last Friday, and like 3 different people came in, all buying the new Ace Frehley album. Which I didn't even know he had one.
No,
but this is like Kiss. People that are into Kiss, it doesn't matter. They can be
they
60,
died with Kiss. Yeah.
They can be 60, 70 years old. They're still fanatic about it. And then the one guy, after he bought the Ace Frehley, he was like, "Yeah, I can't wait to go home and play this." Well, I guess I'll see you next when the new Judas Priest is out. And I'm like, who even knew? But I mean,
they're loyal.
I love that loyalty. Yeah.
What a crazy Akron connection with Judas Priest. Tim Ripper Owens replaced Rob Halford.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just
fact,
of all the cities in the entire world, their new singer could be from. And I mean, it's like a made-for-TV story. He's in the cover band, and
he's on our list. That's who we want to have on the show. We just in the process of trying to find him.
I always appreciated. I would say on the Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest debate, I was always more of like, I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan, so I was probably a little more Iron Maiden, but I can appreciate Judas Priest too.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's obviously people that love music are going to be loyal and love whoever they're into, but
that was just
there's a special bond there with metal people. And
that was interesting. They all knew that they ordered that and it came in. They all couldn't wait to come and get it.
Yeah, Ace Frehley. Yeah.
One of my great friends that I played in a band with for a little while.
What did you play?
I mostly just like garage band stuff,
but instrument?
Guitar.
Okay.
Guitar, and then I actually decided I like playing bass better. And so I play bass, but what actually ruined me for guitar, which this is just pathetic, was I got really into Guitar Hero. And I got really good at Guitar Hero, but I remember thinking, if I had just spent all this time, the hundreds of hours I spent playing this stupid game with this dumb plastic guitar. But one of my buddy who I was in a band with, his brother-in-law was Ace Frehley in a Kiss tribute band. I was either like Cold Gin or Strutter. It was one of those 2 bands that kind of played a lot locally. But I remember this was like in the early 90s. He would get into the whole get up with like the silver platform boots and just, I mean, they're such a great band to do covers of, because it's like you can really get into like the theatrics and the makeup, and you don't even really have to look that much like them, because once you're in the makeup, who cares? But
we have a friend who works in security at various venues like the Civic and Blossom and what have you, and he was talking about this Kiss tribute band. And just the whole tribute band phenomenon to me is something that I'm fascinated by. I don't understand it, but I'm fascinated by it. And because, every week you see all these new shows that are happening. And
there could be 4 or 5 playing in Akron.
2/3 of them are tribute bands. But anyway, and they put a lot of work into it. There's a lot of money involved. But he was saying that these guys, they also they had a thing like you could meet them backstage and they charged you $10 to get your photo taken with them.
Yeah.
With the
tribute band.
With the tribute band. And then my favorite thing was that they were going from their gig here, they were going to play in Pittsburgh, but they were doing a Kiss show without makeup, like that Kiss does.
Like when they did their what was it, like Kiss Unmasked or whatever that tour was.
And I was thinking, that is amazing.
People pay for that.
I mean, they're really
I'll go to the
adopting the
Unmasked
persona.
tribute show.
Yeah.
I wonder if these guys get like plastic surgery so they actually look like Gene Simmons.
Or like, do they go through the history of like, we're going to replace Vinnie Vincent with somebody else? Or,
right.
It's funny, like what you said about cover bands. That I mean, like I'm I don't know if I could say my favorite band because I probably have like a top 5.
Sure. Yeah.
But in the top 5 is definitely Led Zeppelin. But I've actually never seen a Led Zeppelin cover band. Like, I appreciate what they do, but there's something about it that just like, I'm sure I would love it if I went to one of the shows, but I've never really felt like drawn to go see a cover band.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, I want to thank you, Jason Segedy, for being our guest.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I think we could easily get another full episode out of Jason. So down the road here, I think we'll maybe have you back sometime.
I would be thrilled if you felt like I was interesting enough to come back.
Oh,
and,
absolutely. Maybe as things progress.
We can talk more music next
time. As things progress with the Polsky project, we can maybe do a catch-up on that. So anyway, thank you very much. This has been From Akron and Beyond with my co-host Nick Nicholas. I'm Bob Ethington, and we will see you next time.